Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session of Spotlight On, hosted by Matter. My name is Matt McDermott. I'll be hosting this session. We've got a really good lineup of panelists for today's topic, which is sustainability. So I will shortly introduce them, but just a little bit of housekeeping. This will be an interactive session, and we love fielding questions from the audience. So please do get involved if you can locate the comments section on your platform, which is either LinkedIn, YouTube, or Twitter. I hope, and we'll be fielding them at any point, so we can bring them up on screen. If you want to direct your question to anyone on the panel in particular, we can also do that. But we'll get started with a couple of questions, set the scene, and then we'll get into hopefully some audience questions. So yes, welcome to this session, and we'll get into our first panelist. We'll go one by one introductions. So I'll pick on our first panelist, which is Jeff Marshall, somebody who is probably a familiar face on these sessions now. So Jeff, for anybody who doesn't know you, can you just give us a brief introduction?
Thanks, Matt, and thanks for having me and for the invite. So my name's Jeff Marshall. Very, very briefly, I've been a governor for 30 years, chair for 23 years at one of the first primaries to become an academy. So we academised 12 and a half years ago. I'm one of the 3 trust members. I'm a trust member of a 4-school multi-academy trust. I run a company that converts schools to academy status. And in 8 hours, we convert our 287th school to academy status. We support multi-academy trusts in growth audits and MAT MOTs and due diligence and MAT mergers and transfers. And I have a second company, which is a CPD training and coaching company. And I was a national leader of governance for 8 years, training governance, reviewing governance, and mentoring chairs of governance.
Fantastic. So lots on your plate then. We usually wear one of those hats for these sessions. So I think today you'll be more your in the school hat, giving some insights on what sustainability means and how we prioritize that as well. But without further ado, we'll get on to the next panelist. So Jenny, like magic, appearing on screen. Hi, Jenny.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you very much for having us.
Good, good. And can you just introduce your role as well in the company?
Yes, so I'm the head of business development at Edison's. Edison's are multidisciplinary property consultants. We cover a wide range of estates issues, everything basically to do with estates. And we've worked within the education sector probably for about the last 7 years. I've been involved with all of that, and that's going from the very, very beginnings of the kind of SIF process and advising schools and academies on how they can help and how they can achieve funding for the various different projects that they want to do. But now that's kind of morphing into how do they get funding, how do they manage to kind of start on that road to net zero, which they now need to be progressing on, and just dealing with the issues that they've got. And what I tend to do, I'm not a building surveyor. I don't deal with the kind of day-to-day of all of that, but I do have kind of quite a high-level view across the whole, the whole arena in terms of the funding side of things, and what people's issues are. And we do a lot of talking with the people that we speak to on a day-to-day basis, just to listen to them and to understand what their issues are, and to kind of help them try and find solutions and how we might be able to help. If we can't help, how other people can help, and that kind of thing, really. So we're a bit of a sounding board as well.
Fantastic. That's great. And some keywords there as well that we'll get onto shortly. Last but not least, we have your colleague, Gary. So Gary, if you just want to build on that in any way to introduce yourself, that would be great.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. I also work for Edison's. I'm a building surveyor. I have been working as a building surveyor for about 33 years now, 23 of those years in the school or education estate. I'm also a governor of a school and a trust, so I like to think I can on both sides of the fence. And where Jenny does act as a sounding board to our clients to understand what their current problems are, I'm the one at the coalface trying to help them through it. And by seeing things from both sides, I think I have a good attempt at doing that.
Brilliant. So hopefully that's kind of evident there, really, to anyone who's tuning into this session, that we're trying to get a bit of a range of Jeff, who's, working in the school and being a chair of governors for many years, and then also Edison's as well, who can fit into that and hopefully advise and give advice on some of your questions. Just in case anyone is late joining, just to re-emphasize that this is an interactive session, so do get your questions into the comments section, and we'll try our best to answer them. But just to get us started then with some scene setting. Jenny, what is sustainability? How have we got here to where sustainability and net zero, for example, is important?
So obviously sustainability is kind of the buzzword at the moment. You hear it on the news all the time. Everyone's talking about it, whether it's public sector, whether it's private sector. Everybody's got this route to net zero that they're being told they need to go down. It's not just about buildings. It's not just about, what people do with their estates. It's about supply chain and things like that as well. Organizations can't get to net zero unless their supply chain is also going towards net zero. So it's about everybody working together to get to that destination, I suppose. 2050 is the big date, I guess, which is where the government have said they want everybody to, all the public sector to be net zero by 2050. It's quite a big ask. It's 27 years, which is not really that long in the overall scheme of things. And it's going to cost an awful lot of money to get there. There will be natural life cycle changes that will, just new technologies and things like that will mean that net zero products and net zero, additions to buildings and improvements to buildings will take place. But there's going to have to be a lot as well, and there's going to have to be quite a lot of innovation that's done in that time as well, because at this moment in time, probably Gary might disagree with me, but I think the innovation isn't quite there in terms of being able to get people all the way to net zero, but equally the funding isn't there either. So people are going to have to be quite creative about how they think about how to do things as well, and kind of go on that path. But it's something that we speak to schools about every day. It's the number one topic at the moment of, when we're talking to schools, it's how do I do this? What's the best way to do it? How do I get money to do it? What do I prioritize first? All of that kind of thing. It's just, and when we go to shows, when we're on stands at shows, everybody is coming to talk to us about decarbonisation and sustainability and net zero.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And Jeff just mentioned there, kind of 27 years until a deadline, lots of things going on in the sector. As a chair of governors, how does your trust and your schools ensure that actually it is towards the top of the priorities right now?
And Matt, one of the issues here is you've got individual schools, you've got single academy trusts, you've got empty mats, you've got small mats, and then you've got medium and large mats. And by and large, individual school SATs and empty mats, we don't have any states team. So what we have to do is actually join up the strategic with the operational. We can't just have a site manager who's talking about sustainability and one eye on the future, because we're all transient in education. So, but multi-academy trusts may have the ability to create something that's bigger than the sum of the parts with estates teams. So it becomes really incumbent and important for the individual schools and SATs like mine to actually seek the best external support we can find via companies like Edison's and the platform that Matter provides, which is accessibility to information, because we don't have that ability to have 5, 6, 10, 15 site managers creating a team which is bigger than the sum of the parts. So it's always there, and we've got to think about ESG, environmental, social and governance. We've got to think about joining up, but we then also have to think as individual schools, how do we balance finances with standards, curriculum planning, the use of the estates to improve pupil experience, and how do we balance all of that with health and safety when there's a transient band of volunteers, which is the governance function, and yet we then quite distant sometimes to the operational staff who are coming in and doing the job. So it isn't just about looking at sustainability, it's about looking at every constituent part and figuring how do we get that support, where is the best support we can find to actually alleviate some of the issues and the pressure that we've got in an individual school. In other words, how can we join up every school, whether we're single or whether we're part of a MAT? That's what goes through my mind as a chair of governors. Basically, and one of the things I've got is how do I leave the place better than I found it? Because it could be a situation where a school says, let's kick the can down the road because it's someone else's problem. I've heard that phrase a number of times. We can't do that, Matt. You and I have talked long and hard over the years about what governance is. It's about stepping up to the plate, leaving the place better than we found it, and accessing and joining up and accessing the best information we can, like this.
Yeah, we've certainly had many a chats on that. Gary, I'll just let you build on that as well. You'll speak to a number of trusts and schools. So yeah.
Absolutely, and I echo what Jeff said there about the school, the personnel that work within the school. You know, they don't have the time or the capacity to really take on board the issues that have to be dealt with in the drive to net zero and general sustainability. I really do think that it is a case of taking the support that you can get from wider networks such as this, by utilising the skills and resources of consultants such as Edison's to support the school in the move forward. Of course, you know, we know that funds are tight across the piece in education, and so we do understand that there's the potential for these efforts to be seen as another expense. But we don't have time to, as Jeff said, kick the can down the road, or to write what might be referred to as an empty policy about dealing with it. Just some pieces of paper that goes in a file and sits on a shelf. Nobody applies, nobody reviews. We have to move this forward. And there's also capacity, I would say, for the different government departments that are involved at the moment, particularly with the drive towards decarbonisation. There's room for them to have some joined up thinking. You know, the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero needs to work more hand in glove with the DfE so that the two organisations, the two funding streams can be used beneficially for, dare I say, the school estate we've actually got rather than the school estate we might dream about.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, some really good points there. Now, I'll probably go around the room now, if that's okay, and just get a very short answer from each of you on what a sustainable trust actually is. Gary, if we just start with you, actually, we'll come straight back to you.
Yes, I'm on the simplistic side of the scale, thankfully, in terms of my primary expertise is dealing with the estates, so the buildings. And a trust that is set in a good position to present how they plan their strategy for improving their carbon output or their sustainability generally, they'll know what they've got. Now that may sound simple, but if people don't understand how the buildings that they work in function, then they can't do anything about improving that function. So you need to know the quality of the building you're living in or working in. And as I say, we don't have time, we don't have the money to rebuild the stock by 2050. We don't even have time to insulate the stock by 2050. So you know your starting point in order to be able to put one foot in front of the other to make improvements with the buildings that you're working in a sensible, rational, and, dare I say, sustainable way.
Yeah. Jeff, on to yourself, a quick comment, and then I know that we're going to get to a question. I think Jenny's having a bit of trouble hearing us at the moment, so we'll come to Jenny if I find out that she can hear us, because that would be a hard question to answer.
Matt, I think I understand what Gary's saying is that, you know, he's concentrating on one aspect of that, and he knows as a governor we concentrate on many aspects as well. So my issue here is that we've got so many plates in the air, and what we've got to do is actually take a step back and not focus on one individual entity or one area, but we've got to consider, if that area there, how does that impact on this area here? And when this area here impacts on that area there, you can't focus on one, you've got to focus on all of them. And that means having the right people sat around the table with the right skill sets and the right mindset, making the right decisions for the right reasons. Sounds easy, but once you actually start making the right decisions because you've got the right support, you start making better decisions, and better decisions always lead to better outcomes for children. And this ultimately is what the governance function has to consider. that we don't just take one entity and deal with that. What we do is we should take a step back and look at all entities and see how does the estate impact on pupil experience. How can we use the finances for integrated curriculum financial planning? How can we actually use the data to upskill? How can we use upskilling to improve data? So all of these things, it's in the air. For me, it's having the right people sat around the table and having the right support networks, because that is going to be the only way we can focus on so many plates in the air and not drop one.
Great. Fantastic answer. Thank you both for your insight. And I'll put this question up on screen now. So thanks for your question, Dan. Are there, get your glasses on, Jeff. Are there things the education sector can learn from other sectors on the road to net zero? Or do you see education leading the way for others? That's a fantastic question. I think as well, I'll just put into this too, the education of children as well is quite a big part of that sustainability journey at the moment, and how they can become a part of that, whether that's switching off computers or saving energy across the trust. That's something that I've heard about. So yeah, I'll come to you. I'll come to you, Jeff, actually.
Okay, Dan, that's a really good question, and actually you've hit on something there that I have been trying to bring out and tease out in other areas. One of my big things is actually how we join up corporate governance with educational governance, because what one can learn from the other actually adds to both. So what the corporate sector can do in Road to Net Zero, what the corporate sector can do in governance, actually should add weight to what we do in the education sector. If you look at what multi-academy trusts are, they are limited companies. So, and they have directors and they have trustees. But if you also look at what we do in the governance function in education, we step up to the plate. We don't get paid to what we do. We have a transient band of volunteers. And what we can do in the Road to Net Zero for our children and generations to come should actually be then transferable into the corporate sector to actually support each other. So I think actually both sectors then need to lead the way. I think we need to sit around the table far more than we ever have done, because education has always been kind of separate to corporate sector. I think we need to lead the charge and the conversations about, we all sit around the table, what can we learn from each other? Because if I can learn 1% this year, I'm 1% better suited and better skilled in my trust. If I can actually improve a company by 1%, that company is 1% better. So actually, I think we can create something bigger than the sum of the parts, and we both need to lead the way on that, Dan. But it's a great question.
Yeah, absolutely. Great question. Jenny, we'll come to you. Hopefully you can see the question up on screen, but are there things the education sector can learn from other sectors on the road to net zero, or do you see education leading the way for others? Oh, I don't think we can hear you. If you just want to check your microphone settings, I'll add Gary back in just in case we can hear Gary again. Gary, can you hear us?
I can now. Can you hear me?
Yes,
excellent.
We can. And then Jenny, if you do just want to test, just to make sure that we can hear you, just say anything along the way. But yeah, just a moving mouth at the moment. Not sure why.
Well, unfortunately, I missed Jeff's answer because I lost vision and sound for a brief period, but I have got them both back now. No. So trying to address Dan's question, or to try not to, I'll try not to reiterate what Jeff said, but essentially, yes, the schools can learn from other sectors where we are dealing with processes of people movement, of the things that we buy, how we buy them, the things that we do with our buildings. To come back to my area, we can learn from the experience and the detail produced by other areas. But equally, they can lead the way. You know, we're a part of the public sector, and the public sector generally is trying to lead the way in a momentum towards decarbonisation, at least. You know, by the funding injection that's been put in through Salix, it was BAIS, now Department for energy security and net zero. That injection of funding back in 2020 and in subsequent years was intended to get some momentum going, to stimulate the market, to allow some innovation in technology and method. So yeah, there's lessons to be learned all round, and we can certainly learn our own and feed those back to the wider community.
Mm-hmm. Right, let's try again. Jenny, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes. I think there's a delay, but if you just want to give some thoughts on the question.
Everything is.
I think we're struggling with internet. I'll just move Jenny into the background. We'll get on to the next question anyway. So yeah, we've run through kind of what sustainability looks like. Jeff, you mentioned around strategic, move into operational, how you link the two. How important is the governors and the trustees in that journey? Because, like you say, we want to lead to better educational outcomes, but how do you, again, sell that to the board? That's where funding should be going.
I think, Matt, to be fair, if you look at what education has, it's been a series of individual schools and individual sites. Before the Academies Act came out, it was you could have 500 schools in a local authority. Were any of them really joined up in the estates and the use of estates and sustainability? Probably not. Do multi-academy trusts join up as many local authorities? Do they join up? Yes, they do, because they may have an estates team which comes together. But I do think, Matt, that over the years we've had schools, and with the greatest respect to schools, and I've been involved with them for 3 decades, sometimes it's the easiest thing to do is what we've always done, and it's learn behaviour. I think it's what we're trying to do here is actually think outside the box. And actually say that we've got a group of governance people who are out in the big wide world, who come from a different perspective with a different mindset and a different skill set. And actually, I think that actually helps. I think it helps not just being one-dimensional and focused on one side. I think what we should have is this ability with the governance function, because ultimately the governance function is the ultimate decision maker. So what we can't have is, we can't not upskill the governance function in all of these decisions, but we're upskilling our operational entity, our staff, at a rate that we're not matching in the governance function. So my opinion is maybe we're watering down the decision making. If we actually just put it all back onto the school, for the school to make the decision, I think actually you've got an extra additional skill set in the governance functions sat around the table, having different perspectives and saying, oh, my company does this, my company does that. Let's have that. Let's throw that into the mix, rather than just saying we've always done it this way and it's easier. We've always done it this way since we opened in 1931. It's for me. It's time to start thinking outside the box, and it's time to start thinking more joined up, and it's time to start having different people sat around the table. And the governance function is the ultimate decision maker, man. We can't keep putting all of this onus on our operational staff and then just dipping in and out of decision making. We've got to get together for the greater good, for society and the cohorts now and the generations that follow us. We've got to actually bring a skill set, make better decisions, and take some pressure off the operational staff. And that means us governance function upskilling and actually understanding what's going on, and being able to actually keep those plates in the air, as opposed to just always expecting our operational staff to do it.
Yeah, some really good points there. Gary, just a couple of thoughts on maybe what Jeff said there, and then I've got another question for you.
Okay, Jeff's absolutely right. The considering things in the round. I am limited in having my expertise to the buildings, but in support of that and the wider point that Jeff's made, a school building is more than just a building. It's a system that supports teaching and learning, and it's intended to help build the future of our next generation. So the place where we operate and where we carry out our function is at the heart of it. And so it also does, as Jeff said, need to be considered its impact on other elements of what we're trying to do when we make changes to the buildings. So yeah, let's go to the next question then, Matt.
Yeah, so just around kind of how funds are tight, we look at a situation like the energy crisis. And I know that we may be looking at kind of longer term gains, but still, what are some of those benefits of having that sustainability strategy, making your trust more green?
I think it comes back to knowing what your building is like, how it's performing now. Because if you can ascertain some simple things there, then there are some easy wins to make some immediate inroads into your expenditure. The type of thing I'm talking about is I go in schools day in, day out where they're still fully lit with fluorescent lighting. Now, I do realise there's a capital expenditure to turn that over to LED. But if you consider that changing to LED will probably save you 85% of your energy cost, that means that in a typical primary school now and other schools that you'll recoup the expenditure of the new lighting in 18 months. With the price of electricity going from typically 15, 17 pence a kilowatt to 38, 35, 43 pence a kilowatt, that payback time is reduced enormously. So it's a bit of a no-brainer to say change your lights. The summer holidays coming up, it doesn't take long to relight a school, primary school, about a week. So look to see if that capital expenditure can be made. You will immediately start saving. Similarly, insulating loft spaces. We've been, everyone's been talking about that for 40 years. There's not much reason to look at a loft space without insulation in it now.
Yeah, and where do you start then as a CEO of a trust, and like many of our members are, where do you start on that road to being a green trust? I was speaking to a trust CEO back in March actually at our awards, and they were quite keen for us to have an award next year for the greenest trust and the best practice out there. What are some of the best things that you've both heard out there as to where to get started, I guess? Not so much practical, but strategy wise.
Jeff, have you got some thought there in the wider spectrum of sustainability?
Gary, what I see out there for good practice is people coming in with initiatives that's thinking outside the box. That's what I see, and sometimes you've got to take a decision that you can't necessarily afford. If we look at multi-academy trust growth, one of the things that all of our CEOs, and we support over 50 MATs, one of the things that they always say is you've got to grow the central team before you grow the number of schools. And most trusts say, how do you do that if you haven't got the money? You need the schools in before you actually get that money. And sometimes what you've got to do is think outside the box and actually wonder, well, how can we do this before? How can we get all these estates done before? Can we actually get economies of scale of bulk purchasing power now before we even have new schools coming in? So we can actually start this drip feed of improvements to sustainability early. So sometimes you need all the time, you actually need the external support and platforms like this to actually start having that conversation. And that for me is key. And where I see it is where people start making decisions when they've got a question mark whether or not they can afford it, but they know it's right. Because what it does do in some trusts, it actually makes people stand up and find those grant monies, the use of TCAF, the use of TEG, the use of SIF bids, etc., to actually go and start doing this, even though they haven't got the money themselves because schools are underfunded. But it's thinking outside that box and actually just asking different questions, but getting the experts to walk through the door and say, you could do this, you'll recoup that money, you can kick the can down the road on that. It's having a different perspective as opposed to just always doing the same thing.
And I know that we're covering you up there, probably, Gary, but it's quite a lengthy comment. But I thought that it was quite important. I know that, he's talking about some of the work that he does, Kevin, but just the part around we've found all roles in a school are important and should be part of the mission as a chair of governors like yourself, Jeff. So, any closing comments, Gary?
Yeah, I could agree with that sentiment that if you're going to be truly sustainable in an individual school or in an wider trust. You need to engage with everybody. You need champions in your organisation to build the enthusiasm and to build the drive for certain measures. You need the staff to buy into it, to take part in it. And ultimately the children will see what's going on. You know, our kids are not daft. But when something happens in their building, they do see it, and they may well question why. And if they feel that we are doing the right thing, we're sowing the seeds with them to do it all the way down the line.
Yeah, brilliant. Okay, fantastic. Well, that brings us to an end. Been going for about half an hour there. Sorry for any technical difficulties that we've had there. That's quite a new one, but hey, that is what happens when you're live, I guess. So yeah, thank you very much, Gary, Jeff, and thank you for Jenny as well, who set the scene nicely as well for the conversation. So, Gary, where can people find you?
They can find me through our website, edisons.com, or at my email address, gary.ben@edisons.com.
Perfect. And Jeff, I'm sure you're happy to answer any questions that come your way after this session.
Absolutely, Matt, as always.
Great. Fantastic. All right. Well, that brings an end. We will see you in 2 weeks, where we'll be talking around AI in education as well. Sorry, a bit of a tongue twister there. So yeah, hope to see some attendees there too. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you for having us.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you, Matt. Thanks, Gary. Cheers.
See you.